The economic impact of this war is driving us into recession. President Trump comes on every day or every other day and makes statements that he hopes will calm markets. He's trying to manipulate the marketplace to persuade people things aren't as bad as you think they are. This war isn't going to last as long as everyone says. Now, how much longer can he do this? Can he do it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? It all depends upon whether or not you think you're going to get a sudden collapse of Iran and a sudden willingness to surrender Iran to Israel, which is effectively what we're fighting for. Remember, this is a war, as Hegseth says, for Israel against Iran. So I don't see that happening. So that's the first part. The second business is, again, what's the economic impact globally? And most Americans don't know what it is. It's profound. It's back to fuel, food, feedstock, and fertilizer. We're looking at famines breaking out over the next 6 to 12 months because in Africa, South Asia, the Middle East, you can't grow food without fertilizer. Your green revolution is being effectively reversed. And then finally, the issue for most Americans, sadly, is if you only lose a few people on any given day, very few people pay attention. In other words, 10, 15, 20 people killed or wounded. That's unfortunate, but Americans aren't going to be sort of distracted from the television, from the game on Monday night, or from buying a six-pack at 7-Eleven. On the other hand, if we were to lose 400, 500, 600 men within the space of 24 hours, that would probably alert everybody that, my God, we're in a real war. And you see, the game in Washington is to convince everybody it's not a real war. It's only a war for the Iranians. And that's not true. It is a war that is regional and has the potential to go global. But Americans aren't paying attention because, frankly, the enemy has not killed large numbers of us, thank God. But if that happens, and I think that's a distinct possibility, depending upon what we do with these ground forces, that could change.
And in fact, speaking of those ground forces, whatever they may do, Hegseth said there are 15 different ways that we could use these troops, and Iran doesn't know which ones they are. And they're right; they all are options here. But it almost doesn't matter what they are, whether it's Karg Island, whether it's Kashim Island, some of these other smaller ones actually in the Strait. Bandar Abbas, as you have heard it recently, it's been in the news also. And then even some ground operations up in the Kurdistan area on the Iranian side of that border. I mean, it almost doesn't matter what they would be doing. It's hard for me to imagine any ground operation with that number of troops in a country that's 4 times bigger than Iraq. It is expecting some ground troops and has mobilized a lot of their Basij to well over 1 million total troops. Is there any kind of plausible plan that would reap some sort of benefit for the commensurate with the cost we would likely lose in blood?
It seems unlikely to me. It's sort of sending people with jackhammers to the Rock of Gibraltar and say, we want you to remove this rock over the next 24 to 36 hours. So 1,000 jackhammers start working on the Rock of Gibraltar. How's that going to turn out? It's not going to make a dent. The Rock of Gibraltar is not falling. It's not going to move. And that's the way I see this strategically. It's back to the earlier comment. You're using air and naval power to lay siege to a giant continental power, Iran, that is protected by mountain ranges and deserts, has 93 million people. How do you inflict real damage that's going to make any difference? And I think that's part of why you're hearing from Donald Trump and others the possibility that in addition to the oil infrastructure and the power grid, we may also attack desalination plants. And of course, the problem with that is that Iran will respond. If you look at the desalination plants, I think somebody said there are roughly 50 of them, maybe a little bit more, across the Arabian Peninsula, reaching up into Kuwait. If you destroy those, you're going to ensure that millions of people die of thirst. Literally, that's what will happen. You've got a desalination plant outside of Riyadh that is enormous inside, and without it, the city of Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia, can't exist, which means that they are already planning on the very high probability that that plant will be destroyed, and they'll have to evacuate more than 1 million people, or they'll face dying of thirst, literally. So that's one problem. The other problem is you've got very few forces. Now, some of those undoubtedly, I guess, are going to be used in the interior of Iran. That's the hope. Others will be used to seize points on the ground or islands in the Persian Gulf that we think are strategically vital to Iran. Well, there's a problem with these assumptions as well. First of all, most of the U.S. Navy in the Indian Ocean is 1,000 miles away from the Persian Gulf. Now, most of your troops are going to be on ships that have to come in closer to launch V-22s and helicopters carrying Marines into the Gulf area. How do you do that? How do you do it without being discovered? How do you do it without being identified and immediately targeted? Why is the Navy operating 500 to 1,000 miles away from the Persian Gulf? Well, they want to stay alive. They don't want to go under. So that's problem number one. Are you going to take the airborne troops and drop them in from above? In other words, are you going to conduct an airborne assault? You may remember that back in 1991, Schwarzkopf was besieged by the Marine Corps because they wanted him to launch the Marines on an assault against Kuwait City. Later on, the airborne mafia went to Schwarzkopf and said, let us seize Talil Airfield at An Nasiriyah, which you'll remember. And Schwarzkopf said no to both because he said there would be too many casualties. In fact, he told the Marines, you may lose more Marines in accidents trying to take the city from the sea than you will to enemy fire. It's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. He told the airborne crowd, no, I'm not going to do that. Forget it. You'll get a lot of people injured. What are you going to accomplish? Now, in this setting, you're talking about a far more competent and lethal enemy in Iran than what we faced in Iraq. And by lethal, I mean these people have weapon systems that allow them to reach out and touch you from hundreds of miles away. They don't have to park missile launchers on any of the islands in the Persian Gulf. They don't even have to put people out there in very many speedboats. All they have to do is drop an intermediate range ballistic missile on top of a ship that's trying to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody knows that, and that's why the insurance underwriters aren't going to support it. So if all of those things are true, how are you going to get them in? And then secondly, let's assume that we're brilliant and we have magical ways of doing it. Maybe we have stealth aircraft that can't be detected. Once they're in there, how do you sustain them? How do you evacuate your wounded? How do you feed them? How do you provide water? I mean, where are they going to go to get these things? If you're going to try and fly it all in, I would imagine that every conceivable air and missile defense weapon the Iranians have will be focused on preventing that. Then to that, you've got to add all these precision guided weapons, whether they're drones or missiles, that will be used against the forces that you put on the ground. Now, I suppose somebody wants to run around Iran and try to find enriched uranium. Well, good luck with that. Again, you're going to have to fly a long, long way. Remember what Desert One looked like and how far they had to fly from their location in the southern part of Iran to get to Tehran. I don't know what could happen. And again, how do you find the enriched uranium? How do you be absolutely certain? How can you be absolutely certain that you're onto the right thing? I mean, if I were an Iranian and I thought this was even a possibility, I would plant all sorts of strange pieces of enriched uranium and put them where somebody could find them and then sit there and wait for you to show up and destroy you. I mean, the whole thing strikes me as being somewhat ludicrous, but I could be wrong. Maybe they've got a special magic way to do this that will avoid all the pitfalls that I've described. I don't know.
Well, and I'm showing on the map here as you're looking in. I mean, if you went in from Iraq to Isfahan, which is, or Natanz, either one of these things here, you're talking about that's 454 miles if you're coming in from Iraq, and that's the straight line distance in the air. And you see all this has to go over Iranian territory. So every bit of this route here, just to get troops in to any material that may be in these areas here, that certainly the Iranians can read a map, I would imagine. And so there would be anti-aircraft capability all around here that can take out helicopters. I mean, how risky would that part be?
I would regard the risk as unacceptable. And again, this goes back to our experience with Market Garden. You put enough paratroopers or Marines far enough ahead of you and away from you that you can't adequately protect them and reach them. what happens? They get killed or they're taken prisoner. So I think all these things have to be taken into account. I hope that is in fact what's happening. See, the problem again is this tendency to underestimate the Iranians. I think we've done that from the beginning. I think it's a serious mistake to do that now.
And I want to go back to something you said just a second ago, because that was also addressed at this press conference this morning. You referred to what President Trump said in his ultimatum on March the 30th here. That's yesterday. The key part where he says, "We will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and cargo island, and possibly all desalination plants." This morning, one of the questions for the general was, basically kind of, isn't that a war crime? Now he's going to answer this. Tell me if you can interpret what he said to regular English.
General, the president wrote yesterday that the U.S. might destroy Iran's electricity generating plants and oil wells. Those are his words before ending this operation. Is there a way to do either of those things without seriously harming civilians?
Thanks for the question. We're always thinking about those considerations and develop options to be able to mitigate those risks pursuant to the normal practices that we do in the military.
What? Mitigate pursuant to, wait, what does that have to do with taking out desalination plants? How did you interpret that?
I think that General Kane was brought out of retirement and promoted to 4 stars to do the job. He's going to do what he's told. And from his vantage point as an airman, he and the community of airmen in the Air Force, and probably to a lesser extent in the Navy, but nevertheless as airmen, see this as a brilliant opportunity to validate air power's ability to effectively, quote unquote, win wars. I mean, we've been down this road so many times, we can't even begin to, count them all. So my view is that I think he's aware of that, but he's also going to go back to the things that we did during the Second World War and the things we did in Vietnam. We killed 2 million Vietnamese. How many of those were combatants? Did anyone care? I mean, as war goes on, the logic of violence takes over. And if you can't win one way, then you turn to another. The problem for this approach is that if we destroy desalination plants, if we go forward with this plan to utterly eradicate oil infrastructure, then the Iranians have the ability to target and destroy all of the desalination plants in the Persian Gulf region on the Arabian side. And the last time I looked, there were somewhere between 50 and 57 plants. This would mean that millions of people will die of thirst. That's what it means. And that's setting aside, the fact that we're doing enormous damage to the rest of the world in terms of its ability to grow food because of the fertilizer issue and other critical minerals and chemicals that we can't really live without. So, I think he was telling you, fine, we recognize that and we'll do whatever we're supposed to do to win this war.
Yeah, that's kind of how I viewed it too, because he certainly didn't repudiate that. But let me just kind of ask you, we have, especially after World War II, most around the world on all sides said, we need to come up with, updated Geneva Conventions and the law of land warfare and things that everybody's, sort of fight fair. You can fight viciously, but you have to fight within these rules, et cetera. And for a long time, at least, people gave them rhetorical support. But now then, it seems to me that that those are basically just dead letters, if ever they were anything here. And what are some of the things that President Trump mentioned on there are just categorically the violations of the laws of warfare, where you punish a population, even things that have no military utility. Can we safely conclude that that no one cares about the law of warfare anymore, and that there are no war crimes in practice?
Remember, as Secretary Haig said quite recently, this is a war for Israel against Iran. The Israelis regard this as a war for their existence. The Iranians regard this as a war for their existence. Since we are supporting Israel and doing effectively whatever Israel wants us to do in this war, we have taken on the Israeli mentality, targeting philosophy, and approach to war. And if you want to know what the Israeli approach to war is, you have to look at Gaza. look at South Lebanon. In fact, I would say that the Israeli approach at this point is to create imitation Gazas all over the region, and that includes Iran. If Iran can be turned into a Gaza or subjected to Gazification, and that's the price of victory, that's acceptable to the Israelis. That's acceptable to their lobby in the United States and to the Zionist billionaires who are pressuring Trump to fight this war. Now, I would hope that we have somebody left in Washington with some degree of character and backbone to stand up and say, look, this is not an existential war for us. And to be blunt, we've already done more than we should have done. And if this is not enough, so be it. But we should cease fire, because the larger global implications are horrifying, as I tried to point out at the beginning.
Now, let me ask you on the morality of war, because you can argue certainly with a lot of facts that at the state level, nobody seems to really care about any kind of laws of war. Certainly, nobody's going to hold us accountable either inside or outside of our government. But about the troops, I remember my first combat experience was under you and several others in Desert Storm, and in the preparation for us to go. Even from Saudi Arabia, before we launched into fighting the Iraqi divisions, you guys told us, our leaders, that there's the law of war we have to follow. That we can't shoot prisoners, we can't do all this stuff, and we told us we have to do the right thing, and that imbued us with this moral oughtness that we have to fight hard, but we also have to fight fair. I mean, that's what we had going in there. But if you take away that, and even at the top level, there's no concern about doing what's right. I mean, are you concerned that may trickle down into the troops, and then even at the tactical level, they may also loosen up the laws of tactical warfare?
Well, this in every war that lasts for longer than a few weeks, you end up dehumanizing your opponent. We demonize the opponent in any case before we go in, and you can listen to President Trump reading from Netanyahu talking points about how terrible Iran is. And unfortunately, lots of people in the United States have ingested this garbage, and they repeat it ad nauseum. So I try to tell people, Iran has changed quite a bit in the last 47 years. It is by no means the same state or the same society that it was 47 years ago. But nobody wants to go there. Instead, you thoroughly demonize the opponent. When you demonize the opponent, you end up dehumanizing them, particularly when you go into action. When you lose soldiers, and you may or may not remember that we did lose Sergeant Muller, who was in a Bradley and had 5 or 6 other people wounded. But when he was killed, people emotionally, particularly in his troop, were furious. They were angry. And they became immediately interested in payback. In other words, we'll kill all of these people in front of us. And I had to deal with that, in February 26, with officers as well, who did not want to stop killing. They wanted to continue killing when it was perfectly obvious to me, since we couldn't move, we were restricted from moving, that we had no choice but to stop firing and allow whoever was still out there to live. But there were a lot of people who opposed that. And this is human nature. So that means that, first of all, wars should be kept short if you can do so. They should be fought for limited objectives, not unlimited purposes. Right now, we're in a war that should be limited by the objectives, but it's not. It's a war for the destruction of Iran on behalf of the Israeli state and its agents in the United States, period. That's what this is about. The average American doesn't completely grasp that, but more and more Americans are figuring it out. But again, unless you get a lot of Americans killed, no one's going to pay much attention. And so the objective is to, whatever you do, don't take heavy casualties. And remember, this is the myth of air power. It's sort of sex without consequences. Yeah, go in, bomb, nobody can touch us, and we get away free. Well, that hasn't worked that well this time around, and I think it's not going to work well in the future. I think more and more our manned aircraft are going to be vulnerable. But having said all of that, for the moment, we're still believers in this myth. And as long as that is preserved, we're going to continue to do stupid things. And that includes this war, which doesn't need to be fought, never needed to be fought, certainly not by us under any circumstances.